We all grew up knowing that every good fairy tale story begins with once upon a time. But what about the stories of our own lives? We don't necessarily get a once upon a time or long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. We have to live it in real time. We have to play it as it comes, and we have to figure out who the heroes are, who the villains are, and how the story's going to go. And that doesn't always give us something that we can look at the last page about. So we're going to talk about that today again with a return guest, Jazz Azari, who's going to be back with us. And right now, it's time to put on the brakes, grab a cup of coffee, and join the conversation because it's time for Coffee Breaks with Steve. Welcome to Coffee Breaks with Steve. I'm Steve Glavin, and this is the show where we come together around our virtual coffee table every week and join the conversation to chat about interesting topics with amazing guests. If you're joining for the first time today, welcome. And if you're one of our regular viewers coming back, welcome back. And I do wish that you would take the time to do what people are already doing in the show, and that is to say hi so we know that you're here, especially if you're here for the first time. We'd love to see you up there and find out where you're coming in from. So let's see. I see it. Jazz is here. Our guest is here in the chat, which is great because that always means that when the chat's taking place, our guests can be here and respond and answer questions and make their own comments and have fun with you. So, hi, Jazz. Good to see you here. Rick Venturi is here. Kathy is here. I didn't see a hello yet, but I think that I saw that Jerry Thompson was tuned in as well. So if that's the case, hi, Jerry. And if, again, as we go along here today, please say hi. And once we get into our topic, make sure that you do join in the conversation because that's what this is all about. I don't want to spend a lot of time ahead of time, but I do want to mention I'm back in my home studio. Been upstairs kind of improvising for the last several weeks because we had family in town, and the room that is my studio is also one of our guest rooms, which means it was in use and just easier not to be disturbing people and disturbing myself. But anyway, I'm back in the normal setup. You're aware of the major IT cyber crash that occurred over the last 36 hours or so. And I know a lot of people have been affected by it. We've been affected by it. Carol has been in Providence, Rhode Island for the last 2 weeks, and her flight was supposed to be leaving first thing this morning. She was able to check in yesterday and get her baggage pre-checked, got to the airport this morning in Providence, Rhode Island, and was able to get through security and to her gate, only to discover that her flight from Providence to Atlanta, the first leg of her flight, was going to be delayed by 6 hours, which would mean missing her on her layover, her connecting flight. And so when she checked in at the counter, they told her that with that, missing that flight, the earliest that they could get her back to Spokane would be Monday, possibly Tuesday. The big issue right now with some of the airlines is that with the shutdown, the crash that they had that affected them overnight, night before last, and part of the day yesterday, a lot of their equipment and their crews are not in the right locations. So she had to change airlines, and she has to stay an extra night in Providence, and she'll be coming home tomorrow. She won't get home till after midnight tomorrow night. So yeah, there's some impact, but we're handling it well. All right, listen, I want to share some sweet and savory with you and some things that are on the calendar this week and that we want to talk about just a little bit. First of all, does this picture look familiar to you?
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That's right. That was the first moon landing, 1969. Today marks the 55th anniversary of the date that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin first set foot on the moon. Not only the first Americans, but the first human beings to set foot on the lunar surface 55 years ago. And yeah, I do remember it clearly. You can make of that what you will. We've talked about the fact that I'm an old guy before. Another thing I wanted to mention this week, a lot of celebrities pass away, but there's certain people who are just icons that seem to transcend the generations. And we lost Bob Newhart a couple of days ago at the age of 94. Man lived a full life. He lived a great life. And he's one of those people, rare people, that I can think of just a handful that kind of fit this category of having been present and been popular in multiple generations over the decades. I think of Tony Bennett. I think of Betty White, who had popularity back when I was a kid, when I was very young, maybe even before I was born, even though I'm old, and then continued through different projects and appearances to impact and influence and be popular with different generations over the years. And that's certainly true of Bob Newhart from his stand-up comedy days in the early 60s, appearances on late night television, through his sitcoms, the Bob Newhart Show, Newhart, and others. And he just continued to make appearances even in very current times. I remember him in the movie Elf, and he had he had a recurring role as a guest on shows like Big Bang Theory. And so even the young generations know Bob Newhart and love him. And he was that everyman, deadpan kind of guy. So rest in peace, Bob Newhart, and thank you. Thank you for all the memories that you gave us. We have a couple of birthdays this week, and one of them I want to mention, and I hope I pronounce your name right, Nancy. Nancy Wangui joined us for the first time on Coffee Breaks last week. She tuned in to watch Jazz's first appearance here, talking about starting is easy, finishing is hard. And Nancy wrote me an email afterwards to let me know, and it was her first time watching Coffee Breaks. And I'm going to go ahead now, having said Coffee Breaks, and take a necessary sip. She said it impacted her. She talked about how Jazz's message came just at the right time for her. And then she said, by the way, my birthday is on July 22nd. Could I get a shout out? Absolutely, Nancy. Happy birthday. Her birthday is this week. First time viewer. So again, if that applies to you, let us know when you tune in. Let us know how the shows impact you. And then Joan Sparks. Joan is my aunt. Just a lovely lady. And she is celebrating a birthday this week as well on July 25th. So happy birthday, Aunt Joan. And yeah, it's just fun to be able to acknowledge with you, to celebrate with you when you have a special day. And so if you have a birthday, an anniversary, anything coming up this week that I missed because I didn't have it on my calendar, or you hadn't yet written me an email to say, I love the show, by the way, can I get a shout out? Let us know in the chat right now what your special day is, or one that you're celebrating with a special someone in your life. And if you got a special day coming up, perhaps in the month of August, because August is upon us, or even in the fall, you can send us an email at cbwsteve@comcast.net, and we will make sure we put it on our calendar and that we do give you a shout out and celebrate with you when your special day comes. All right. Wow. It's a great day to be here. Thank you. Already seeing, a lot of everybody drink, or in some cases, Carissa, everybody drinking. Sure. Or drink. Yes. This is why I don't do this job, right, Carissa? Carissa is our director. She is here in the background. She is always here making sure that we stay on track, more or less, as much as I can be kept on track. But listen, I want to reintroduce our guest. If you tuned in last week, you've already met Jazz Azari. And if you didn't tune in last week, when we get done with today's show, please go back. You can find the recorded episode on Facebook or on YouTube, and please watch it, because as I said already, we know it has an impact. We know it had an impact. And I know it impacted people who were tuned in last week because they commented and during the chat and talked about different things that message meant to them. If you didn't get a chance to tune in last week, I want to share once again Jazz's bio and tell you a little bit about her. Jazz Azari is a senior consultant with Guidehouse. She's a former Foreign Service officer, Department of Defense, civilian, and government fellow with over 18 years of expertise in foreign policy, diplomacy, defense and military affairs, maritime security, security sector governance, and environment, science, technology, health, and entrepreneurial issues. From June 2018 to June 2019, Jazz was a government fellow with the Geneva Center for Security Policy in Geneva, Switzerland. Prior to her fellowship, Jazz served 7 years with the Department of State. In her first assignment as a diplomat, Jazz was the staff assistant to the ambassador in Embassy Nairobi, the largest embassy in sub-Saharan Africa. Later, Jazz also held policy positions in Washington, D.C., working in the Bureau of East Asian Pacific Affairs, Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, and the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. After leaving the Foreign Service, Jazz was a program manager for the Department of State's Global Innovation Through Science and Technologies online programs and live media broadcasts, interviewing expert entrepreneurs. She also served as a central planner for Secretary Kerry's Our Ocean Conference with over 500 participants. With the Department of Defense, Jazz was a research analyst for the U.S. Marine Corps Center for Advanced Operational Culture Learning, where she developed and provided pre-deployment training on Iraqi culture. As a human terrain systems social scientist embedded with a U.S. Army brigade in Diyala, Iraq, Jazz conducted interviews with Iraqis to better understand perceptions, expectations, and experiences with the U.S. military. Jazz has published scholarly articles, including on terrorism and military psychology. Jazz studied at the University of Kiel in Germany and at University College Dublin in Ireland. She also taught English in Tianjin, China. She holds an MA in War Studies from King's College London, graduating with distinction. She graduated summa cum laude with a dual BA in International Relations and German Studies from the Schreyer Honors College at the Pennsylvania State University. Jazz is fluent in German and has studied Kiswahili, French, Spanish, and Arabic. She has published 2 fiction novels, The Noble Rogues and The Obsidian Staff, the first in a 5-part series, the Lost Legacy series, and has held book signings in period attire at Barnes & Noble and the Maryland Renaissance Festival. And if you think that was easy to get through without completely getting tongue-tied, don't even ask. But it's worthwhile because I think it's important for you to know who Jazz is. However, with all of that, I think there's one more brief clip that will tell you just as much about Jazz as that bio.
Hi, I'm Jazz. I've been known by many names: Jazzercise, Jazzmatazz, for my whirlwind energy, Jazzmania the Devil. But I'm here with you today as Jazz Azari.
Yeah, she's probably going to get me for that later, but that's a public clip. It's part of a video on her website, and we'll probably be able to share more about that later. So for right now, let me introduce to you once again and let you see my most recent conversation with Jazz Azari. Jazz, welcome back to Coffee Breaks with Steve. It's good to have you with us again.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve.
I always find it interesting to talk to people about beginnings. And I'm curious about your childhood, your upbringing, and how that may have shaped some of your goals, professional goals, life goals, and your creativity.
Well, yes, I definitely believe in origin stories. And I think with mine, what's most relevant to not just my writing, but the way that I approach life generally is that I grew up doing martial arts for many years. And we had this amazing instructor named Master Cothran. And he's this big guy, solid as an oak tree, very stern, sharp eye, very much into discipline, but he was also very encouraging. And true to many martial arts practices, we started every class with a creed, be a good citizen in your community. And we also recited these 5 core tenets. And the tenets that he had were courtesy, integrity, perseverance, self-control, and indomitable spirit. And when you hear this 3 times a week, every week for, I think it was something like 6 years, that really built the foundation from which I viewed the rest of my life. And I still try and live by those values. And you will see, particularly in the Obsidian staff, how much morality and ethics and these core tenets have been woven into the different characters.
Going beyond just the early days of your upbringing, your career path itself is not one that people might typically associate with authoring fantasy novels. Can you kind of talk about your career and how that unfolded and how that has influenced you?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought about this question for a while because I watch Masterclass. Definitely a pitch. If you don't have it, it's worth getting. And they do have a lot of authors on there: James Patterson, Mark Lewis. And it's interesting to me because the way that I view writing is that it's better to have lived to write versus to have written to have lived. And what I mean by that is I genuinely believe that if you have studied and experienced different things and have tried to expand your horizons and had some of that work experience, the characters that you have in your books will be a lot richer. So
Hmm.
intuitively, it might not seem like there's a connection, but there definitely is. My personal career path, I do see a thread from college through being in government, being a consultant now, and then being an author, in the sense that I have always been interested in diverse perspectives. I've always been interested in communication. So, whether that's with foreign cultures or with people of different ages and different generations, that was something early on that I said, okay, this is something I'm passionate about. And then also the desire to serve others. That, again, coming from martial arts, also as an author, you do serve other people because you're an inspiration to them. You hope. As an author, that is what you hope for. So in college, I studied abroad in Germany, I studied abroad in Ireland, and I taught English in China. And each of these different experiences gave me something beyond just having a lesson plan or learning something about the European Parliament. What you get from those experiences are the humor that can be cross cultural, or the crazy things college kids do that stick with you, like playing frisbee in a foot and a half of snow in Penn State, and so on and so forth. But what I wouldn't have known if I had stayed indoors and I hadn't gone exploring, which is when I say the only way to grow is to go, is to leave your comfort zone, is in China, for example, my students told me, if we have a poem and we have 5 characters in that poem, those characters mean different things depending on how you pronounce it because it's a tonal language. So that poem can be translated in multiple ways. And for us, speaking English, it's a one-to-one correlation. And so that for me was, oh, this is a different way of looking at language. And as an author, that's pretty important. After college, well, during college, unfortunately, the Iraq War started, and that very much changed my trajectory. What I wanted to do was still the same. I wanted to serve our country, protect American citizens and our service members, and then also help Iraqi citizens. Um, and so instead of going straight into international relations, I helped with pre deployment training for the Marine Corps. I was in embed in Iraq with the Army as a social scientist, really being able to go outside and help the population. And going back to communication, understand their motivations and their perceptions and their needs and what did they want from the US and how did they view them? And then how do we, through the military, be able to better help them and help them create a better future. And so, without going through the rest of my career in too much depth, we can always come back to it. But I did leave and become a diplomat. My first post was as a staff assistant in Kenya. And what was amazing about being a diplomat is you find that it's not just the countries that you live in, but being able to interact with the population, just like being in China or being in Europe, you really understand that the more things change, the more they stay the same. The closest friend that I had was a waitress, a Kenyan waitress who was not affluent. Her husband was a pastor. They were struggling to get by, but there was more commonality between us than there were differences. And I think that that's a good lesson to remember in life generally, is because we do have a human connection. And that was something that as an author, I think I drew upon and hopefully was able to create more three-dimensional characters. So you understand that the antagonists are not necessarily patently evil, and the protagonists also have their flaws.
As you write these fantasy novels, where does your inspiration come from?
Well, this is going to sound like a Disney cliche, Steve, but everyone and from everywhere. Creative endeavors, particularly not just stories, but if you think about artwork, if you think about poetry, movies, what have you, they need to move people. They're supposed to make you have some visceral reaction. And that means you need to be relatable to people, which means you need to understand them, going back to that thread of my career path. And so I learn as much from a 5-year-old kid on a soccer field as I do from one of my college student mentees. Another group that I don't think gets enough attention, but really is inspiring for me, are tribal nations. This year, I was so honored to have a few days meeting with tribal representatives and really listening to them. And tribal nations have such a rich history of oral storytelling. There are 547 federally recognized tribal nations in the US. All of
Mm-hmm.
them have their own culture, their own songs, their own traditions, their own dances. And so for my future writing, I absolutely want to explore their history more. That's something I haven't had the chance to do, but I have been inspired by them, even in those few days that I had. And then I would say, finally, this might come as a counterintuitive answer, but people who are experiencing negative emotions, maybe because they're angry, they're grieving, they're insecure, those people inspire different aspects of my characters, because those are human emotions. It's not making you a bad person because you're experiencing it. You're just stumbling at the time. And so that understanding can create compassion for us, and maybe also solace for the people who are going through it. I know that's a long answer, but inspiration is what, as an author, I strive to do for other people, and a lot of people have done for me.
So I want to talk a little bit about the books that you've written because we've been kind of leading up to that. And by the way, I will mention that I have now copies of The Obsidian Staff and The Noble Rogues. I've just
Oh.
started reading The Obsidian Staff, so no spoilers here because I don't want and we don't want to spoil anything for the people who now are going to want to get these books and read them. But let's talk first about who you see as the audience for your books.
So the actual categories for the Noble Rogues and the Obsidian Staff are considered young adult fantasy fiction. And for context, protagonists in the young adult category tend to be between the ages of 12 and 13 to 18. So in the Noble Rogues, the main character, Finn, is 13 years old, his sister is 11. And then in the Obsidian Staff, the main character, Kate Smith, which is not her real name, but I am also not going to have any spoilers, she's 16. So that's how they fall into the young adult category. The range of readers, however, varies. In the Obsidian Staff, I actually piloted the first few chapters for an 11-year-old, daughter of a friend of mine, and then a 75-year-old who is the mother of a friend of mine. I heard it landed well. That was very positive for me. The Noble Rogues is a lot more classic young adult fantasy fiction. So, generally speaking, the ages I would say would be about 11 to 20s. The interesting thing, Steve, I'm going to pose a question to you. How many people do you think buy young adult fantasy books that are over the age of 18?
Oh, I just from thinking about myself, I would say it's probably a fairly large number. And whether I mean, I don't know how many of those would be buying them as gifts, but I have a funny feeling a lot of the people who purchase them who are above the young adult age range are reading those books.
That is a very good answer. Yes, more than half of the people who buy young adult books are over the age of 18.
Okay.
So you have won the golden star for the day. And the majority of the buyers are between the ages of 30 to 44. When you mention that these might be gifts for the younger individuals, that is true, but 78% of those making the purchases are in that 30 to 44 age group. So it's actually astonishing that that's who you find reading these books.
can you talk a little bit more in detail about the books that you've written so far, The Obsidian Staff and The Noble Rogues, and a little bit about the universes in which they exist, a little bit about the characters? Again, we don't want spoilers, but we want to give people enough of an introduction that it intrigues them and maybe they want to learn more.
Absolutely. I'll start with the Noble Rogues because it's a little bit simpler. It's a very classic coming of age story. Finn, as I said, is 13. His younger sister, Callie, is 11. They live in a tiny village, and the way that I describe it is somewhat like Harry Potter without the magic. So they go to a school. Finn has an apprenticeship with a saddler, so he's around horses. We all love horses. But in the background, there is a warlord called Lord Greencrest, and he's traveling the lands to find a thief and a murderer called the Phoenix. And there's a mystery behind the identity of the Phoenix. And also, as Finn and Callie are in school, they're finding that their teachers aren't being honest. Their parents, they have a fraught relationship with their father. They're not entirely sure why. And even at Finn's apprenticeship, he's starting to hear things that don't really add up. So the two worlds collide in the end of the book, and I won't explain how. There's a reason why it's called The Noble Rogues. I would say it's very fast paced. And the interesting thing about The Noble Rogues is there are many chapters and conversations that I actually had in real life, or there was something that I actually saw in real life. And it goes back to the fact that if you've lived, it is far easier to write about something.
So, what about the Obsidian Staff? I mean, you have a book here that has multiple characters that are, in a way, focal characters, and the chapters are even written from different perspectives, not only the main character. You even have sometimes insights and perspectives from the antagonists, the dark wizards in this book. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. It is very intentional that the chapters go back and forth between the characters. One, because I like the fact that you have a lot of cliffhangers. And the second reason is so if you are not a 16-year-old girl coming of age, maybe as an older reader, there's another layer of life that you are going through that you might be able to relate to with a different character. So I tried to make the Obsidian Staff very multi-layered in talking about morality, philosophy, duty versus love is a very common theme, families, how they relate to one another, and very much accepting the flaws of the protagonists and understanding that one of the protagonists might have had a difficult day, one of the antagonists might be very honorable. And how do you reconcile this girl who, I would say, in the beginning of the book, loses all of her memories about who she is, has to listen to the protagonists and the antagonists who are trying to convince her to be on their side. The interesting part about the book is that the antagonists, known as the Dark Wizards, have lived in exile for 800 years in something called the Southern Mountains. And their whole purpose is trying to leave the mountains and come back into sort of the lighter lands of Ilion. In of itself, that's not necessarily a terrible thing to want. And that's the argument that the antagonists try and make. On the other side, the protagonists say, look, they don't tell her, she finds out, but she is part of a prophecy that says she's either going to help the Dark Wizards repopulate Ilion, or she's going to stop them from the potential destruction of the land. Because she's a blank slate, you as the reader have to figure out where you fall, and you don't know actually which way she'll go. It's not clear by the end of the first book. You have a little bit more of a perspective, but through the Lost Legacy series, which will be a total of about 6, you'll find out why she chooses the path that she does.
You've got a full-time and very busy career. We've talked about the fact that you worked in government. Now you're working as a consultant, and sometimes consulting work can give you a little more leeway, but sometimes it makes life and work even busier. How do you find the balance between a job and other life activities and writing?
And Steve, you probably know this as well as everyone because you have this amazing podcast. At one point, you said, this is important to me. I'm going to do it. And that's how I think that entrepreneurs generally find the time. They make the time, whether it's an hour in the evening, an hour in the morning before work, because it's something that they're passionate about. And I do, with my mentees who are college students, emphasize the fact that even when you enter the workforce, you have to keep your hobbies. Uh, Not everything we should do is for a resume. When you're in college, you're more than a composite of your test scores. And what
Mhm.
makes you relatable, going back to that idea, is you as a person. People are interested in you, Steve. You are you. Nobody else is you. You are unique. Um, I actually have found in job interviews multiple times that people have looked at my resume and they're like, okay, you've been government, da, da, da. Okay, what I want to ask you about is why did you become an author? And the first couple of times I had this hesitation because I was thinking to myself, are they serious? That's what they want to talk about? But it's absolutely true. And as a very concrete example, I was interviewing for a chief of staff position at a small company, and everyone came in, 3 or 4 people, very, crisp business suits, and that's what they went to. They didn't ask me about what did I do that would support the duties of that position. They wanted to know what it was like to be an author. And that's why I think it's important to keep the things that give you your sense of self, because people become interested in you. People want to know about you as a human being, and that helps your work and it helps your relationships. And that's why you do what you feel is important.
Who are the people who you admire? Who are your heroes?
That is a very long list, namely because we have so many good people in life and so many people who are dedicated to helping others, going back to the idea of service. One group would be Peace Corps volunteers. They are some of the most courageous, salt of the earth people I have ever met. And you have to be if you're going to a foreign country, you don't have the language, you're there for 2 years in hard conditions. Peace Corps volunteers inspire me 100%. First responders, like we saw during COVID, tirelessly working. Teachers, the same way, promoting education. It's probably not easy to be a teacher of a middle school class. I actually have many teachers in my family. One of my family members is a librarian, so I do understand how rigorous that can be. I would also say Doctors Without Borders. A lot of people, Médecins Sans Frontières, if you're familiar with the French, people don't realize how much hardship and the fact that they put their lives on the line every time they're in a conflict zone to treat people on both sides. I had the privilege to meet the former DG of Doctors Without Borders while I was in Geneva. And the stories that he would tell is very humble and very, very difficult. So if you don't already support Doctors Without Borders, very good cause. And then, Steve, near and dear to both of our hearts, supporting veterans, supporting service members. You and I actually met through Chris Kalenda and the Sabre 6 Foundation.
Right.
And the work that he's doing, turning veterans' post-traumatic stress into post-traumatic growth, is unbelievable. And I've never heard of anyone else doing that kind of work. But there are many veterans out there that need our support. They inspire me. I admire the fact that they protect American citizens. They go through a lot of hardship as well. And they certainly inspire me on a day-to-day basis.
What's next for you?
Where do I begin? Well, so I'll start with things that, again, I'm very passionate about. I talked about education. I will actually be leading an interactive creative writing workshop for our public library here in Virginia on September 21st. I am plugging that in case anyone is in the DMV, the DC metro area, and wants to come. Steve, I can send you a link at the
Please.
end of the show.
Mm-hmm.
But what I love about the opportunity to do this is it can shed some light on what our public libraries are doing, because a lot of people might not go as much as they used to because they have the internet. Also, again, a great way to connect with people and show them that they can express themselves in an entirely different way. Another venture is every year I'm at the Maryland Renaissance Festival in Crownsville, Maryland, and I am a visiting author. And this is very different from a Barnes & Noble book signing because I am fully in Renaissance garb. That is a requirement to be a visiting author. And I have a stellar Irish accent. So if you are again in the area, October 13th, come for the accent, if nothing else. It is a very fun time. And turkey legs. You can do both.
Do you have any additional thoughts that you'd like to share with our viewers?
I will caveat by saying I don't tend to give advice, but I will give some insight. So I have 3 that I usually end any speeches or any discussions with college students, particularly ones who are struggling. The first one is be the hero of your own story. What I mean by that is the most interesting stories we have in life are not the ones where people have had enough of a financial means to get through college and then they have a connection and they get to the next thing and they get lucky and they get promoted. That for me is the equivalent of if you're in Lord of the Rings and Frodo was able to destroy the ring in chapter 1. Nobody would want a story. Nobody wants to know about what happens. They really are enthralled by the fact that this person who didn't have any magical powers has to go on this very long, arduous journey to get to his goal. And there's bravery and there's courage and there's pain involved. And the reason why I say be the hero of your own story is I actually had a mentee who was going through this very thing. And she was incredibly bright. She was very passionate about grassroots politics and getting people involved. She had to take a semester off because she didn't have the financial means. She said to me, she goes, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And why do other people have opportunities I don't have? Why am I struggling? And I said, because when you get to the Hill, when you get to Congress and you're a Congress member, you are going to be relatable. It all goes back to being relatable. Your constituents will look at you and they'll see themselves. That's why it's important to be the hero of your own story, particularly if you're going through hardship now. The last 2 items are a lot shorter. One is from TD Jakes, delayed is not denied. If you are trying to do something right now, you're looking for your dream job, you're trying to get a social network in a virtual world, just because it hasn't happened yet, it could happen in the future. So that's okay. And then my final point would be trust your gut instinct. That sounds so basic, but the reason I caveated this saying that I don't give advice is whatever I say, once you are in a situation, again, in a job interview or thinking about an activity or trying to find a volunteering opportunity, you'll feel something internally, and that will guide you better than anything the rest of us could possibly tell you. So trust your gut instinct. Push on open doors, take opportunities as they arise, and that will lead you very well through life.
How can people follow up to learn more about you, the books, what you're doing? Where are the best places for people to go?
Well, people can email me at the Lost Legacy Series at yahoo.com. I also have a website. I haven't been good at updating it, so sending me an email is always the best way, but that's the lostlegacyseries.com. Very simple. And I absolutely encourage anyone who even wants to talk about their own writing. I'm always happy to be an ear. The best thing you can do as an author is to inspire other people. I love my characters. I love the paths they take, but it's about the reader. It's about you.
Excellent. Jazz, thank you so much for taking the time to be here on Coffee Breaks with Steve to share so much of your interesting story and the work that you have done, the work you're continuing to do, and I believe it truly is an inspiration to others.
Oh, thank you, Steve. This has been such a pleasure.
All right, that was our additional conversation with Jazz, and you know, it's interesting to get other people's perspectives on life. Quite frankly, I find, and I know, Jazz talked about having mentees, that she is a mentor. I've served as a mentor, worked as a mentor in different situations. One of the things that I've discovered, I think, is really important and special is that as a mentor, I have yet to be in a situation where, as the mentor, I haven't learned from my mentees. That even though my role is supposed to be to help them progress in whatever they're doing, I always find that I'm inspired, that I learn from them. So thank you once again, Jazz. And actually, we have a little bit of a treat for you today, a little extra special because Jazz Azari is actually here live. You saw her in the chat, but she's actually here to talk to us briefly at the end of the show today. So, Jazz, welcome once again to Coffee Breaks with Steve.
Hi, Steve. Thanks so much for having me. And to your audience, thank you for participating. I love the notes you had in the chat. It sounds like a lot of you are also interested in young adult fantasy fiction. So, very happy to have you.
So, Jasmanian Devil, really?
That was about 10 years ago. When I saw that video, I cringed. I went, "Oh, that's
It's still on your website, Jazz. It's still
it."
out there for the public to see. You know that.
My acting classes, I feel like I'm so much better.
It's very sincere though. There is
It
something
is.
about that that's just very pure when you make those comments at the beginning of that video.
It's nice to be able to kind of just have some fun with things. I think that when we get so focused on life and work and being serious, adults need to have as much fun as kids, and we just have to remember that. It was a great video. It is worth watching
It is
if
worth
you haven't.
watching. It really is. And I think some of that, even some of the pictures that we showed were from different points. By the way, I have to mention this after when we came on last week's show and I read your introduction, your bio, and then brought you on. And a couple of people say, "Oh, with all of that experience, I was expecting to see a 60-year-old woman." So let me just say this: you've preserved very well for a 60-year-old woman.
Thank you. Lots of
Yeah,
sleep. Beauty sleep.
that helps, right? And hydrating and sunscreen. So part of the reason that you and I thought it would be fun to have you join at the end is we wanted to also talk about something else that we're going to be working on that's going to be coming up a little bit later this fall. We're kind of planning for the 250th episode of Coffee Breaks. Do you want to, since it was your idea, do you want to mention what we are preparing to do?
I would love to. So, anyone who has ever seen a late night talk show host do kind of a turning of the tables, I think Stephen Colbert has done this multiple times, where as the host, he actually has a guest host who interviews him about his life and his hobbies and sort of learning fun facts. And I will be the guest host interviewing you, Steve, about a whole bunch of topics I do not want to spoil for your audience, but absolutely you all should tune in. You have seen Steve for more than 200 episodes, and this is your chance to really get to know him further and learn things that you have not yet heard about. And I'm really excited for this, Steve. It's going to be wonderful.
I think I'm excited about it. One of the things is, no spoilers. I'm not sure that I'm even going to get a preview of what you're going to be asking me when we get to that episode. So we'll see how that goes. I'm actually looking forward to it. Well, Jazz, hang on a second because we're going to quickly here mention some things that are coming up in the next few weeks. And you might as well get some practice being a guest host or co-host by just hanging out till the end of the show now. But we do have several things coming up over the next month or so that are already planned. Next week, you're going to meet a couple who their story as a married couple, their love story, growing up together, dating, getting married is fun, but they are both music teachers in the same school district. They teach different classes, but they very often find overlap with their students, and they're just funny and creative. And you're going to want to be here to meet Jason and Cheryl and Boris next week. And then a couple of weeks out, Carol and I are going to be gone to London, England for a couple of weeks. And so Carissa and Shalane are going to be taking on the hosting duties once again, or as they call it, hijacking the show. And we're still working on exactly what's going to be happening on August 3rd. But on August 10th, Carissa is going to be having a conversation with a lady who is actually her Kazakh language coach. that she's been working with. And this lady, Asel, lives in Kazakhstan. And so she's going to be talking about Kazakh culture, talking about learning a foreign language with Carissa, and talking just about things that are going to be different from what we are maybe used to and take for granted. You will want to be here for that conversation as well. Then the week after that, we get to the middle of August. Shalane and I are actually going to be in Las Vegas. There's a whole story about why that's happening. No, we're not professional gamblers, but we're going to be in Las Vegas for some things that Shalane is pursuing and taking care of as part of her acting career. And while we're there, we are going to be trying out some adventures and doing some things that a little bit outside of our normal comfort zones. And we'll be at the end of that week on August 17th and talking to you a little bit about that, sharing our experiences there. Viva Las Vegas. And then on August 24th, we're going to have a conversation with Chris Carter, who's the executive director of the Livermore Valley Performing Arts Center, the Bankhead Theater in Livermore, California. They host and bring in acts from really all over the world and bring them to audiences. And Chris is going to be here to talk about his experience, his own experience in the arts, why he feels the arts are important, and the things that are going on at the Livermore Valley Performing Arts Center and the Bankhead Theater with a topic that centers around engaging, enriching, and inspiring people. So once again, you will want to continue to come back. And for those of you who are tuning in and watching this recorded, that is an option. You know, sometimes you can't be here on a Saturday morning when we go live. And so we do encourage and invite you to go back and watch the episodes later. They are recorded and they're available to watch later on Facebook and on YouTube. And particularly want to encourage you to go to YouTube, which I'll mention again in just a moment. But what are the topics you'd like to discuss? I said at the beginning, this is our virtual coffee table. We gathered together here to join the conversation. What are the topics you think would be interesting to discuss? Who are the guests you would like to see? Do you know somebody like a Jazz Azari or someone else who might have an interesting story and inspiration, motivation, or just something that might open our eyes to things that we don't already know about? Let us know about that. You can contact us at cbwsteve@comcast.net to share your ideas, and we'd love to hear them. And then finally, I do want to mention, again, as I do each week, that we do have a YouTube channel. And while it's easier sometimes to watch live on Facebook and just everybody's in the same chat room when that's happening, we do want to build on the YouTube side. That's where a lot of people who aren't already a part of the Coffee Breaks with Steve family find us. And we want to engage more people there. Not because I'm looking for fame and fortune. That would be all right. But that's not what we're looking for. We're looking to get more of our topics and our guests in front of people. How many more people could be inspired and learn from people like Jazz and others who are on this show on a regular basis? And they'll want to be here by the time we get to the fall and we turn the tables and Jazz asks me questions. I can tell you that for sure. All right. Well, listen, Jazz, again, I want to say thank you to you. I want to say thank you to all the people who took the time to join today, who were part of the conversation. And, you know, you hear from people like Jazz Azari, and it's just a reminder that we can all make an impact. We all have a voice. We all have some things that we are passionate about and a way to put our voice, our hands and feet into action in order to address those things. So please find a way to make a difference in your world this week. God bless you. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.